Good evening. My name is Damien Sneed, and you are watching Damien Sneed Dialogues. This is a very exciting episode. This is the fourth episode, and I'd like to introduce our guests for this evening. First of all, we have coming to us Dr. C. Malik Boykin.
Hello.
Dr. Boykin, my name is Damien Sneed, and you are watching Damien Sneed Dialogues. This is a very exciting episode. This is the fourth episode, and I'd like to introduce our guests for this evening. First of all,
How we doing?
sorry for that. That was a playback. So Dr. Boykin is a personal friend of mine. We both attended Howard University. We met at Charles Drew Hall, the freshman dorm, many, many years ago. Dr. C. Malik Boykin is an assistant professor in the Department of Cognitive, Linguistic, and Psychological Sciences at Brown University. His research focuses on intergroup relations, hierarchy, prejudice, mentorship, and racial identity. Dr. Boykin received his PhD in social and personality psychology from UC Berkeley, his Master of Arts in social organizational psychology from Teachers College at Columbia University in New York City, and his Bachelor of Science in Psychology from the University of Maryland, University College, after first matriculating and attending Howard University. He has previously secured funding from the Ford Fellowship Foundation and the Greater Good Science Center. His research has been published in academic journals such as PLOS One, Personnel Assessment and Decisions, and the Boston Review. In addition to his academic work, Malik is a hip-hop artist who conducts community service as a member of the Omega Psi Phi Fraternity Incorporated. Let's welcome again Dr. C. Malik Boykin.
Happy to be here. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
And next, I'd like to introduce another friend of mine. I like to call her one of the most brilliant minds that I've ever encountered. I happen to be invited to do a performance along with a lecturer that I was not aware of. I've heard about her from many of my friends, and the lecture was at the Museum of Fine Arts in Houston. And we were coming together to discuss the theme and perform works of Margaret Bonds because they found some recordings of Margaret Bonds actually playing some of her compositions in the Rienzi House there in Houston as a part of the Museum of Fine Arts. And when she opened her mouth, I didn't know if I should have rolled on the floor or jumped up and down because I was ecstatic because of the brilliance of her mind. She's very encyclopedic. She is a lexicon of all things music, all things literature, all things knowledge. I want to read a little bit about her. Dr. Tammy L. Kernodle graduated with a Bachelor of Music in Choral Music Education and Piano from Virginia State University in Petersburg, Virginia. Dr. Kernodle received a Master of Arts and her PhD in Music History from The Ohio State University. Her scholarship and teaching has been primarily in the areas of African American music, both classical and popular, jazz and gender, and popular music. She served as the scholar in residence for the Women in Jazz Initiative at the American Jazz Museum in Kansas City, and has worked closely with a number of educational programs, including the Kennedy Center's Mary Lou Williams Women in Jazz Festival, Jazz at Lincoln Center here in New York City, National Public Radio, the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame Lecture Series, and the BBC in the United Kingdom. Her work has appeared in American Studies, Music Quarterly, Black Music Research Journal, the Journal of the Society of American Music, the American Music Research Journal, the U.S. Catholic Historian, the African American Lectionary Project, and numerous anthologies. Dr. Kernodle is the author of biography Soul on Soul, The Life and Music of Mary Lou Williams, and she served as associate editor of the 3-volume Encyclopedia of African American Music. She currently has also served as a scholarly consultant for the National Museum of African American History and Culture's inaugural exhibits entitled Musical Crossroads, and appears in a number of award-winning documentaries, including Mary Lou Williams, The Lady Who Swings, The Band, and Girls in the Band, and recently Miles Davis' Birth of the Cool. In 2014, she received the Effective Educator Award from the Miami University Alumni Association, and in 2018 was awarded the Benjamin Harrison Medallion. The Harrison Award is the highest award given to a Miami University faculty member in recognition of their research, teaching, and service. She is currently the president of the Society for American Music. Can we welcome Dr. Tammy Kernodle?
It's good to be here with you.
Yes. And I'm going to bring back on now Dr. Malik Boykin. He's excellent. People are already writing comments. They're saying they're extremely excited. And we have Deborah Smith-Pollard, who is a force in the industry, who's also here, and also one of your fellow graduates of Virginia State University, Patrick McCoy. So I'd like to get started for our listeners who aren't aware of what you are doing and what you have been doing. Can you explain to us, how did you come to be in your present career field? We start with you, Dr. Boykin. How did you come to become this professor at Brown University?
That is, I'm going to definitely have to give the short version of this one. And partly because, I had a attempt at a career in music as a hip hop artist. I spent a lot of my 20s trying to make it in that capacity. And after a unfortunate car explosion, I had, just kind of a moment where I had to switch gears, maybe try to do something different. And had a good long talk with my music partner, let him know that I was going to do something, that I was, going to take a different direction. Started studying for the GRE, ended up doing well enough to get into a master's program at Columbia. And then from there on to UC Berkeley. Now, psychology I chose partly because my father is a psychologist as well. He's been a professor at Howard University for many years. And from that standpoint, I grew up in a predominantly Black psychology department. So, going to work with my dad or going to work with my dad as a child, I saw Black psychologists, in abundance. And it just seemed like, that's what Black people do, I guess, when they go get jobs. So I guess maybe when it's time for me to think about what to do with my life, maybe I'll do that. And, but it was a kind of a chance pivot after not making it in the music industry, deciding to go down this road and finding support along the way and using things that I learned from music to try to help me navigate the academic way. So, yeah, that's how I got here.
That's amazing. And Dr. Kernodle, can you answer that question for us as well? How did you come to be in your present career field as a professor, as a researcher, and the president of the Society for American Music?
Well, a similar situation where, I came to a realization I wanted to be a concert pianist initially. And when I went to college, just realized my first year I didn't necessarily have the chops and I didn't have the stomach for that kind of pressure environment, performance environment. And so there were two things that really happened to me that put me on the road of musicology. One was I discovered Eileen Southern's book, The Music of Black Americans, in the library. And I began to read that and was just fascinated by the fact that someone was writing about Black music in that way, was chronicling our history in such an effective way, in a way that I had never witnessed before. And then I met Dr. Ethel Norris, who was from Petersburg, Virginia, came back to Virginia State to visit a few times. And she, at that time, was finishing her graduate degree in musicology at the Ohio State University. And so I'd never seen a Black musicologist. And so there was a lot of different things that brought me to that road, a lot of different people recognizing something in me. And I ended up at Ohio State. And went to Ohio State essentially wanting to do musicology, but not really knowing if I could do the type of work that Eileen Southern was doing. Um, and just had an awakening there at Ohio State, an awakening where, I started to question sitting in classrooms as to why I was not hearing Black composers talked about, Black musicians talked about. And I just set out on a path of self-study. So I was trained as a traditional musicologist, but in my pastime, I began collecting everything I could about Black music, from jazz to classical music, and much of that collection you see behind me, and just read and forged a pathway, and ended up at Miami University, and Miami University seeing something unique in me, the ability to teach and to decipher Western European music, but I also had this knowledge in African American music, not just from a historical point of view, but from a performative point of view as well. And you can say the rest has been history in some ways.
That is absolutely amazing. You mentioned what I call the Bible for all things Black music, Eileen Southern's text, which is amazing. I'm currently teaching a course in African American music history at Manhattan School of Music for undergraduate students and graduate students, and that is our text. And it's an amazing book. I remember the first time I read it, I was very surprised that so many of the people that I began reading about were people that I met while being a student at Howard University. I remember growing up, and I was majorly affected by a woman who sang, I believe it was in between her freshman and sophomore year at Howard University, at my parents' wedding before they adopted me. And that was the late Jessie Norman. And I remember watching Jessie Norman and Kathleen Battle singing at Carnegie Hall, their spirituals in concert, recording. And I remember seeing a lady on the piano, not knowing that I would end up going to the NAACP AXO competition. And I actually met that woman. She could play everything from memory. I'm speaking of Oberlin Conservatory's Sylvia Oden-Lee, who was absolutely amazing. Yes. And Sylvia Oden-Lee could tell you every piece. She could tell you where the oboe came in, or Verdi actually wanted this instrument, or she'd say, well, in Act 2, Scene 4, this is what the character is supposed to do. And I remember seeing her in the hallways at Howard University. I remember sitting in a vocal class, and I went to the library at Howard, and I picked up a video of Scott Joplin's opera, Treemonisha. And I remember playing the opera in my room in the dorm where we were, Dr. Malik. And I remember the next morning I ran to the music department on the third floor of the Fine Arts building. And I ran to the voice instructor that I was playing for. And I said, excuse me, is this you on the cover? And Carmen Balkup said, yes, I was in the Gunther Schuller revival of Scott Joplin's opera, Treemonisha. So I remember things like that. My teacher, Dr. Raymond Jackson, who went to Juilliard after winning several international piano competitions, and his dissertation at Juilliard was on the music of African-American composers. And that is an important topic today. Those are just some of the things that I remember. Can you tell me, we'll go with you, Dr. Boykin, what are 1 to 2 of the defining moments of your life or your career thus far?
Yeah, one of the defining moments of my career was winning the Ford Foundation Fellowship when I was a PhD student. And I say that in part because, not only did it give me the room, it funded, the last 3 years of my doctoral studies, but it also opened me up to a network of people that are still in my life that have brought me a lot of guidance. There were people that I met at that time that are instrumental in how I became to get recruited by Brown University, and they're people that I'm writing with now, and so on and so forth, across disciplines. I'm currently working with biostatisticians and geneticists. One of the geneticists is a person who I've spent time with at the Ford Foundation and the conferences. As well as education scholars and African American studies scholars that I am connected with, that I think with, that I write with, that I met through that connection. So in many ways, the Ford Fellowship Foundation, winning that fellowship just really changed my trajectory.
Amazing. And Dr. Kernodle, what about you? What were some of the defining moments of your life and career?
Wow, I've had many, but I'll limit it to two. I think the first I would say was the real shift in what I was doing in my consciousness as a scholar came in 2012 when I was asked to go to the University of Kansas and be the Langston Hughes visiting professor. Um, I just was exposed to a whole different intellectual community that inspired me and fed me. And the students that I engaged with there were just phenomenal, you know. And I reached a period of just being so inspired that my work took on a different tone, and I didn't teach in the music department. I taught in the American Studies department. So shout out to American Studies KU. Uh, um, and it just opened my mind. At the same time that I was there, the second thing happened to me. I got a phone call, and it was from the Smithsonian, and they were asking me, would I be interested in being a part of a team that Dr. DeWandelin Reese, who was the music curator for the Musical Crossroads exhibit, was putting together. And I literally dropped my phone and broke my cell phone because I thought I was being punked, right? And so, and you know, and they called me back and they were like, "No, it's real. We sent you a letter. You haven't responded." I was like, "The letter's in Ohio. I'm in Kansas." And so, you know, just having that experience took me to another level because the Smithsonian, I visited as a child growing up in Southern Virginia, and it was an awakening for me in fifth and sixth grade to history in a way that I had never experienced before. And so moving from being someone who, you know, is a consumer of that culture to someone who is helping shape what people will see when they come to that museum was just a surreal experience.
You know, this is absolutely charging and electrifying to have a panel such as yourselves on this episode. I will go ahead and say it. You all are absolutely the quintessential example of Black excellence, and I love it. From the didactic education posture that you all have in America and in the world, that you lended your voice to speak and to articulate not just things of the past, but also to help to sort of navigate where we're going in the future is absolutely amazing. You know, I'm grateful for your time, but this is very interesting when you speak about time because I see that Marquez Garrett, a well-known African-American composer, who's also one of the executives for the National Association of Negro Musicians, who just celebrated their centennial. We know that 2019 happened to be 400 years that Africans were brought to America as slaves via the Middle Passage from 1619 to 2019. And they touched first at Point Comfort, Virginia. We also know that last year also happened to be a great year of celebration for women. It was a celebration of women getting their right to vote here in America. And as Dr. Garrett just said, next year happens to be the 50th anniversary of what I call the Bible for all things Black music, the music of Black Americans by Eileen Southern. But then this year happens to be the centennial of the Harlem Renaissance. So people say, what is the Harlem Renaissance? We deal with time. The Harlem Renaissance was a time where I guess Harlem itself in Manhattan, it was the nexus of Black creativity. You know, there are several films that we see with people dressed and adorned very fashionably. There are films that have been biopics, such as the film that one of our classmates, Dr. Malik, was in the Thurgood Marshall movie, and he also was in Black Panther. Chadwick Boseman. And we see there that there was a scene in the film where Zora Neale Hurston and Langston Hughes and Thurgood Marshall were all gathered together in Harlem. I remember stories. I brought up Sylvia Odin Lee because Sylvia Odin Lee told me how she would sometimes go visit the home of Hall Johnson, or actually, you know, they'd sit there and they'd share about music, and people would share what they were doing. You know, there are many stories about what would take place even at the Cotton Club and other clubs that were there, and people were coming to do things at the Apollo and also the historic Abyssinian Baptist Church. Can you talk to us a little bit, Dr. Kernodle, about just give us your own concise definition or explanation of the Harlem Renaissance, and could you point out, even as our topic is the Harlem Renaissance, the writers in music and literature, that there actually are two sort of, I won't say phases, but two components or elements of the Harlem Renaissance, both in literature and in music. Dr. Kernodle?
So I think, you know, how you had described it is an excellent way of summarizing it. You know, we do think of 1920 as the beginning of the Renaissance, and most people situate the end of the Renaissance or the peak of the Renaissance expression was coming around 1934, 1935. And historians have promoted that for many, many years. Most of the major writings that you would read say that. But I think when we look at the Renaissance from that perspective, we are concentrating first only on Harlem, and we are only concentrating on what was the literary movement. And the assessment of that literary movement and the intellectual culture that surrounded it, particularly the writings and the musings of Alain Locke, one of the architects of the New Negro aesthetic that is personified in the Harlem Renaissance, right? We are not taking into consideration what the other arts were and how they were represented, and even how those collective of intellectuals and creatives engage with writers like Zora Neale Hurston and Langston Hughes and Countee Cullen, and all of those writers. So I teach a course on the Harlem Renaissance. At times, that's a special seminar for many of my graduate students. And one of the things that I tell them is that that I want them to think more broadly about what the Renaissance represented from a musical point of view or perspective. Because the Renaissance, from a musical point of view, really challenges that timeline of 1920 to 1935. If we base it on activity or we base it on the actual culture that is created at that time, I believe that the Renaissance, and from a musical point of view, actually can be extended from 1915 till about 1949. And I'll tell you why. I use two things as a guidepost for that. One, I use the very thing you mentioned early in this conversation, Scott Joplin's Tremonisha in 1915. The only concert performance during his lifetime of Tremonisha takes place in Harlem. You know, and this is a pivotal opera in terms of not only African American music, but in American music as a whole. It is the first opera by a Black composer to have a plot and a narrative that is based primarily in that American experience. And it is capturing what is at the center of the New Negro and the Renaissance, right? Repurposing, redefining of Blackness, right? And the shift from a consciousness that was rooted in those 400 years of slavery, and those ways, and what is a new consciousness that was being birthed out of the Reconstruction and the post-Reconstruction experience. So when we look at Scott Joplin's opera Tremonisha, even though it's not performed until the 1970s as an opera, right? The content, the music, and all of that was framed by Joplin in 1915 and this performance. And so that's key, because when we look at the Renaissance and we look at the ideologies that are promoted about music and culture in the Renaissance, and this coupling of mastery of European form and representation of the African spirit and identity, Joplin's opera personifies that, right? And so I use that as the first guidepost for that, and it shifts us into then the consciousness of James Reese Europe, going to Europe during the height of World War One, and his Hellfighters band, uh, introducing to Parisian audiences the music of Will Marion Cook, the light classical pieces that they mastered, but also ragtime and early jazz, right? And so I end my sense of the Renaissance in 1949, because in 1949 we get the staging of William Grant Still's opera Troubled Island as the first opera by a Black composer to be performed by a major opera company. Now, we've had some operas before that, Shirley Graham's Tom Tom in 1932, but that was done by a regional company. And so the staging of Troubled Island in 1949 is the real realization of a full opera by a major opera company by a Black composer. But it's also key for us to understand that in the consciousness of Blackness, because by the time we get to 1949, as Farrah Griffin in her epic book Harlem Nocturne and other scholars have talked about, there is a progressive consciousness that is beginning to become pervasive in Black communities. And that progressive consciousness is going to be the ignition point for the civil rights movement that we associate so much with the 1950s and 60s. So, there's a transition that happens there. But the music, is central to anchoring much of that and showcasing much of that.
That is excellent. You mentioned Elaine Locke, coined the phrase "the new Negro," and that's, I guess, where we get the term Renaissance. And then also Scott Joplin's opera Trementia, James Reese Europe, ragtime, early jazz. But you also mentioned, as they call him, I believe, the Dean, William Grant Still, of the musical element of the Harlem Renaissance, and his opera Troubled Island in 1949. Now, I like what you said there, because you said that the music became it was the progressive consciousness, which was pervasive. And you also mentioned that the effects of slavery, I'm paraphrasing now, from 400 years is something that was expressed through music. I was doing an interview earlier today, and they asked me what did I think the significance of being a music creator during this time of racial tension, and seeing the head of white supremacy and the head of marginalization come to a greater sense of being seen in America. And I said, I believe that the unique thing about music is that it allows you to encapsulate emotion and feeling and communicate it in a very clear way, because music is a universal language. But even if it's an opera, and if there is speech, spoken word, if there are lyrics that are sung, you're able to sort of have it suspended in animation, suspended in time. And that's what music does. We also understand that in Africa, the griots would carry the oral tradition through speech. We also understand, even Hebraically, when people look at a text as old as the Bible, there's certain things that were said, but there's a sing-song to it. Of course, that's a low word to use, but there is a melodic banter, there's a melodic rhythm to the way that speech is heard, and therefore we have dialects, and the Southern people may have a certain drawl or a certain way that they say things. There may be a diphthong, or there may be something that's a little different by the way that someone from Europe says a word as compared to someone from the islands in Trinidad, or Jamaica, or someone in California. And that is one thing that our culture has been definitely tantamount on, is the fact that we have been able to use language, even I say in a musical way, because spoken word and rap is something where you take speech and you allow the inflection of emotion and everything that we've been through, the struggle, and you allow it to come through the voice and come through the instrument, whether it is based on the beat of a drum or whether it is set over a string quartet. Dr. Malik, you were a hip hop artist. When you think about the Harlem Renaissance, what or who is a figure that stands out to you? And I love this. We're sort of steering in a different direction, which is great. Can you talk a little bit about hip hop and expression, and how our people, people of the African and the African American diasporic community, how we use speech and rhythm and melody to express our story?
Yeah, there's a lot in that package of questions. I would say that in terms of the Harlem Renaissance, the first couple of names that really come to mind for me, one person that's not an artist, but I think is somewhat gets lost in the shuffle of some of the conversations that I've heard about the Harlem Renaissance, is Marcus Garvey, who was in Harlem at this time and who was promoting Black entrepreneurship. He was promoting Black businesses, created a publication, the Negro World, attached to his United Negro Improvement Association. And this magazine ends up being a place where some people like Zora Neale Hurston and Langston Hughes published some of their first work. And so I think that he also is a person who brings in this idea that Black is beautiful. We need to have Black models in these magazines. We need to promote Black arts and so on and so forth. And I feel like that was a very integral, this kind of claiming of our humanity as something worth celebrating. And then for me, Langston Hughes has had a profound impact upon me. I actually published a book chapter just last year about my journey with standardized tests. That was a tumultuous journey from being a person who, when I first went to take and practice GRE on the math side, out of 800 points, I scored a 310. And in that moment, I literally felt like my dream of becoming a professor was deferred. And found strength in that poem, as well as in some pep talks that I was given, to stay the course and to grind, to go from a 310 to a 730 math score, which opened up a lot of doors for me. And it was this desire to not have my dream deferred, to not have this, bubble and fester in the many graphic ways that he describes what a dream deferred can look like. So certainly many people talk about Langston and that particular set of words that he put forth had a profound impact on me. Now, when talking about going back to Marcus Garvey, there is this Pan-Africanist idea as well. He came from Jamaica and spent some time in Central America before he came to the United States, and brought with him these ideas about the Black diasporic condition broadly, just that we were having tough times with white supremacy in many places and in many contexts, and thinking that we should collectively have economics and collectively work to improve our condition all over the map. And that then reflects in some of the ways that hip hop emerged, where you have musicians, DJs, traditions that are coming in from the Caribbean into New York City that are combining with some of the ways that you have, disco and the call and response with the the reggae records that then morphs, that combines and becomes this cross diasporic collaboration that is hip hop music from its very beginning. And many of the pioneers were Caribbean descendants living in New York City and having cultural exchange that brought us this cross diasporic story of hip hop that has then gone back out to the world and inspired people in many places.
Mm. Can I, because you raised a whole lot of very nice things that we don't consider about the Harlem Renaissance, because we think that it is monolithically centered in that African American, that Black American experience. But what you bring up is so tangible, because I mentioned two operas, right? I mentioned Tremonisha, that's an American story, but William Grant Still's Troubled Island, which by the way, the librettist was Langston Hughes, is set around the Haitian Revolution, right?
Yeah.
And so what we don't often identify with the Harlem Renaissance is how there is a diasporic worldview that is beginning to emerge out of this art, right? And so these artists, these creatives are thinking about Blackness in a very expansive, multi-directional way, right? And that acknowledgement is not all the time played up. But you also said something, my brother, that I'd like to draw on, if you don't mind. I know you've got an agenda, Damien, but
No, great. Let's go.
you mentioned Zora Neale and Langston. And Zora Neale and Langston are so key, and not just because their works have been so heavily quoted, but because of their proximity, their positionality to these Black composers and Black performers, right? We don't talk enough about Zora Neale Hurston as a folklorist, because what Zora Neale Hurston did in preserving and mining African American and also, African diasporic culture was so important. So much so that much of the work that we see that Alan and John Lomax did with their work with the Library of Congress and doing these iconic recordings and preserving America's folk culture was rooted in the templates, the praxis that Zora Neale Hurston did, right? And what I love about her and Langston is that they did not play to the elitist ideals of the movement. I even in how I contextualized it, my contextualization of the Harlem Renaissance musically was in some ways elitist, because I only talked about concert music, and it did not, but when I teach this class, it's very expansive in terms of it looks at all of these forms of Black expression that takes place in this time. Because when you look at the Renaissance in Chicago, the Renaissance in Chicago is paralleling the advancement of jazz on another level from New Orleans. This is where a modern aesthetic is being birthed with Louis Armstrong in the late 20s, right? Then we also have the advance of gospel music with Thomas Dorsey, right? And even though Lucy Campbell is not in Chicago, Lucy Campbell by her proximity to Thomas Dorsey, right, is advancing a new, more modern aesthetic of Black worship music, right? And then you've got the National Association of Negro Musicians that is coming out of that Chicago Renaissance, right? And so it's multifaceted. It's very much more complex than we think. But Hughes was working through all of these different collectives of people, and Zora Neale as well. And we tend not to talk about that. We tend to isolate people, and we don't consider how they are orbiting and being influenced by each other. So I love what you just said, brother, about the diaspora. Yeah.
Yeah, this is excellent. I just want to highlight some of the things that have been stated about the emergence of hip hop, uh, the multi-directional movement of creators during the Harlem Renaissance, Marcus Garvey, Langston Hughes. And I love, Dr. Kernodle, what you just said about Zora Neale Hurston not sticking per se to the practice of the template of what was the status quo. Very interesting, because there are a lot of conversations going on now, even during this COVID-19 pandemic. And people are focusing on what could appear to be the elitist ideals or ideologies of what people are creating now, and they're celebrating the elitists. But when you think about hip hop music, when you think about jazz, when you think about artists such as Nas and people like Mark Carey, and I could go on and on, Stephon Harris, Robert Glasper, musicians, Keon Harold, that are using their voice, using their platform in a very a level of excellence, but on a very high level. Because many times, you know, you're a classically trained pianist, Dr. Kernodle. I'm a classically trained pianist. I've written operas before, but there is something to be said that gospel music is worth the study. It is worth the placement of opera and art songs and lieder and the symphonic orchestral works that are many times not really celebrated, but many times placed in high esteem and high regard. The same thing with rap, with hip hop, with jazz, with funk, with neo soul. Many people watch the DJ, begin to reemerge with Instagram and with people doing battles. And then I was very, very inspired watching the beginning of Jill Scott along with Erykah Badu. Before their battle, Jill Scott was playing this female Black spoken word artist. And I'm like, who is this? I started texting my friends, like, do you hear the music that's accompanying this speech? And I did a Shazam on my cell phone and found that it was Nikki Giovanni. And so I remember attending one of your courses at Miami University. I guess, I'm not sure if it's the same course you're speaking of. And you actually were talking about Nikki Giovanni. You were talking about the different spectrum of poets and the different spectrum. A lot of people talk about Zora Neale Hurston. You know, we also know because there's been a great documentary on Maya Angelou. We know about Maya Angelou, but Nikki Giovanni is a force to be reckoned with. Can you all speak to some of the people? What you were saying in that class, Dr. Kernodle, same thing, Dr. Boykin, about some of the writers and the different, maybe I won't say sides they took, because the thing is, it was multi-directional. It really wasn't just an emergence in Harlem in New York City, but jazz music did, it was so birthed, so to speak, in New Orleans, and it went up to Chicago. So there were things happening in Chicago. And that's why even today, Chicago is known for the gospel sound with choirs, because there was so much happening. There was an effervescent creativity that was burgeoning out of Chicago. And the same thing with DC. You know, Duke Ellington is from DC, but of course we also know that he was in Harlem. So there were a lot of places, locations, geographic locations, even in Kansas City, where things were happening. St. Louis, there were things happening. California, you know, and when you think about great artists who spent their life work not trying to seek after a Grammy Award or seek after an Emmy, we can even go into, and I would love to, outside of writers and music and literature, we can talk about fashion, we can talk about dance, we can talk about Alvin Ailey, we can talk about the founder of the Dance Theater of Harlem, we can talk about Carmen, I believe Delavalada, I probably said her name incorrectly, and also her husband, Jeffrey Holder, who created the costumes for The Wiz, which was a great musical, which was, I think, a breaking point on Broadway for African Americans, because you talked about in the canon of opera with Scott Joplin's Tremonisha, the characters themselves after Reconstruction, Tremonisha and Monisha, and the idea of community and the idea of not being afraid about Hoover dust and things like that, and them selecting a female to be their leader. Tremonisha in the opera, but also when you think about The Wiz, you think about the story of The Wizard of Oz and how Charlie Smalls took that music and the creators, even people like Valerie Simpson, and Luther Vandross, who wrote Can't You Feel a Brand New Day when it was reimagined on television with Michael Jackson and Diana Ross. But there is such a beautiful pantheon of Black creators in literature, in art, in music, in so many different areas. And can you all just talk about some of those people or highlight some of those luminaries? I mean, from the Harlem Renaissance to now. Who wants to go first? This is great.
Well, I'm going to yield the floor, but can I just say something? Because I think what you just laid out is something that we should just articulate very clear and very definitively. And that is that the spirit of the Renaissance never ended. We can historically want to put an end, but the very basic ideological organic spirit of the Renaissance, which was to speak for those that were muted, to bring to light those that were invisible, right? On these platforms that were inaccessible to us, but to the people who needed to hear them. Because see, we think that the Renaissance was just about us. And it was about us. It was about self-love. It was about us realizing and recognizing the beauty of who we were in a time of crisis. Let's remember that, because 1 year before the Renaissance starts, technically 1919, we get the Red Summer. We have all of these race riots. We have an inflammatory president who says that the birth of nation, one of the most controversial, but also one of the most influential films in American cinematography, right? In cinematic history, we have a president that says, is history written like me? So he's saying basically all these stereotypes, all of this that you are seeing about these Black people on the screen is who they really are. That these people have brought about the demise of our society. And if we do not in any way correct this, right, this injustice that's been done by freeing these people, right, that our society, our moral center as Americans is going to be compromised, right? So it's no different from now. So, but what you really, in a very nice way, summarized was that spirit of the Renaissance, which was to speak directly to the people beyond our communities, to say our lives matter.
Yes.
We have something to say. Our history matters, right? We are an endemic part of the American fabric, right? Lived on. And what we failed to do is recognize it. We talk about it in the 60s with the Black Arts Movement, but we failed to recognize that with the emergence of hip hop, because hip hop was really another generation sparking a Renaissance. And it was a generation that was multiracial, multi-ethnic, because it was just as much, it was many more Black Caribbeans than it was African Americans in the Bronx, right? But look at what it did. It was a totality of expression. It was dance, it was visual art, it was us reimagining what the instrumental aesthetic could be. That first generation of composers during the time of Harlem Renaissance was reimagining the orchestra, right? And here we have DJs who use the turntable and create a new sense of the orchestra, right? Because we just think that people just sample because they have no creativity, but that's because we don't really listen to what they did, right? And then we had our poets. Our poets were our rappers. Our griots were our rappers, right? Who were bringing that culture from the streets, from the masses, right, to the ears and to the eyes and to the consciousness of America and eventually the world. And so I'm a shut up right there and let my brother, because he the hip hop artist.
Yeah.
Bring it, brother.
Yeah, you said something there when we think about art, because I forgot to mention Jacob Lawrence and the Great Migration series. And you're right. Dr. Boykin, speak on it.
So I wanted to jump in and give a shout out to an album that I think is very undervalued, but I think very much belongs in a conversation like this, is Distant Relatives, which was a collaborative album between Nas and Damian Marley. And this album was so heavy. They really told a diasporic story, talking about common struggles of Black people around the world, in hip hop aesthetic and a reggae aesthetic, and also brought a brother from Somalia, Kanan, who came on and talked about similar kinds of dynamics that he experiences in Somalia, and told a Pan-African story, much in the spirit of the Harlem Renaissance, as we spoke on. And so I would very much count Nas in that number of people that are carrying on this kind of tradition, but also your Damian Marleys and also your Kanans who are bringing us a Pan-African lens on and a common struggle that we are all familiar with and can learn from, and should continue to be in dialogue with, not just in our music, but also in our scholarship and in our arts and literature and so on and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. So we've definitely discussed the fact that the creatives during the Harlem Renaissance, post-Harlem Renaissance, and even as the spirit of the Harlem Renaissance still continues to breathe and live today, that they actually pushed for social change. How can we today, and how should we implement the same social changes as creatives? I know recently both of you had a chance to connect with me and attend my recent tour, We Shall Overcome, when we went all across the the North American continent, expressing music that was American. Many of it was African American, but it was in classical, jazz, folk. We highlighted Nina Simone, R&B, Stevie Wonder, and it was called We Shall Overcome, a celebration of the life and legacy of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., focusing on songs of protest and reconciliation, even some gospel music. And the purpose of that was really to educate people and to remind people of the types of occurrences that would happen during civil rights protests, during rioting, and also even during church meetings or during concerts. And even outside, Dr. Kernodle, as you said, it wasn't just African-American people, it was Caribbean Americans, it was people that weren't even from the African or the African-American diasporic community, but also people like Pete Seeger and people like Joan Baez, who would sing, songs like Oh Freedom and We Shall Overcome. It's interesting that the song I saw today earlier on Facebook, the song that I would sing at every concert that Nina Simone actually got from the jazz pianist out of DC, Billy Taylor, I Wish I Knew How It Would Feel to Be Free, was also recorded by the great lyric soprano, Leontine Price. Mm-hmm. So people were using their platform, and they still use their platform, but how can we continue to do that today as artists, as educators, as people who have the platform to write and set things with our pen on paper, or to blog, or to express? How can we implement social change with our platforms? Or how are you all implementing social change now, as you are?
Well, I want to tell a quick story, and it starts with this rap song, a hip hop record by a rapper named Razzcast, West Coast rapper, called The Nature of the Threat. And it's a 7-minute song where he is just talking about a great deal of things that we do not get taught in our history books about Black history, from ancient, 4, 5, 6, 7,000 years ago in Africa to now. And one of my very dear friends, my brother Adrian Taylor, heard this song when he was in high school and on his way to Howard. And that was the first time that he had ever heard the word Kemet, ever. The name of Egypt, and if you translate it from how they write it phonetically. And that began a thirst for him to learn more about this. What is this? And he eventually got a PhD in African American studies and I'm sorry, in African studies, and that degree has taken him all around the world. But it really began for him with this nugget of a word in a song that somebody took the time out to take many of the things that they've learned through their studies and reading and write it into a hip hop record, And so it's just kind of like that song changed a life. And Razzcast had no idea that he would ever meet this person, had no idea who this person would ever be, or what have you. And there's just so many different kinds of ways that the things that and ways that you can pour all of the hard work and knowledge and hard fought things that you have gotten to come to know, pour that into art, and it may change somebody's life that you never meet, and pull them into educating people and pull them into the struggle and fight as well. And I think to that same point, there was a song by KRS-One called "You Must Learn" that I remember listening to when I was in elementary school, and there were so many. He talks about some of, I guess, what you call the Black History Month top 40, the people that we all hear about. Mm-hmm. But he also talked about some people that you don't hear about very much, mm-hmm. and talked about stories that you do not hear about very much, like, Blumenbach, the European scholar who wrote some very foundational racist science that has changed the way that the world has thought about race. My introduction to this particular scholar was through KRS-One's "You Must Learn" when I'm in the 6th grade. You know what I'm saying? And so it's just like pouring these nuggets of knowledge into the music, and just letting those seeds blow out into the world can inspire in a multiplicity of ways that we would just maybe never know. So I think that's part of it. Just don't be scared to pour these things that you know into the art.
Mm-hmm. For me, I think it's expanding our definition of what we call resistance or protest culture. For me, resistance is represented in 2 ways. There's sonic resistance, which is that you let your voice, whether it's the singing voice or the speaking voice, be the point of challenging what is the normative around you. And so that may be simply as you quoting Black women scholars, or you quoting scholars of color, or that might be you utilizing their work in this space, and you invoking different narratives, as my brother was saying, through hip hop, or through many other things, just like we're having this conversation now. That sonic resistance is important, right? And so we changed the conversation, we changed the soundscape around us by the music that we offer, but also by the words that we offer. I also think that the second part of resistance is embodied resistance, that the body, your presence in a space, can be resistance culture. And I don't mean just simply marching. I don't mean simply praying. What I mean is when we inhabit these spaces where Black and brown and gay and queer and these people who are not seen as normative, when we embody these places, right, we are resisting the culture of invisibility and the normatives that are put forth. So every time you as a creative are in the opera house, like you were in Houston, every time that you go on a stage and perform, we get so caught up in being the only one. And we should get out of being uncomfortable about being the only one and say, I am that one. And because I am here, I am going to disrupt the energy of this place, the function of this place, the history of this place, and what its function has been. So every time a Black composer, every time a Black performer, a Latinx, a Asian, uh, these all that are othered, anytime that we embody these spaces, right, that is resistance. It is resistance. And we have to rethink and reimagine the ways that we create social change.
Reimagining the ways that we create social change. I love it. Sonic resistance and embodied resistance for all those who are not the normative. So both of you have a background, much like I do, where your beginnings were honed at a historically Black college and university. Now, both of you have gone on to work, lecture, and be trained at some of the greatest colleges, universities, and institutions of higher learning. What is the value that you received by being students at Virginia State University and Howard University? What did you gain? And what do you think the role of HBCUs, that's the acronym for Historically Black Colleges and Universities, what do you think their role is today?
You want to jump in?
I'll let you go first.
All right. So Howard University for me is a magical place. And one of the things that I quickly learned arriving there is that there's just such a diversity among Black people that I just, as a 17-year-old, the year before I got there, I had not necessarily been exposed to. I'm meeting Black people from, New Mexico who have a Black experience of nothing like mine, and Black people from Belgium who had a Black experience that they are coming to Howard to explore and learn. That was nothing like mine. And so I got into a lot of really fantastic and interesting conversations and just learned so much about the depth and the width of what it could mean to be Black. And I also got exposed in very, intro to psychology. I'm getting Frantz Fanon. And, we're talking about, Black Skin, White Mask and Wretched of the Earth in Intro to Psychology. That does not exist in psychology departments in other parts of the world. And so to have people give you the white canon of psychology that you would pretty much get anywhere, as well as to give you the Black canon and the critiques of that white canon as a part of your foundation, is something that I have taken with me, that I've stood in, that I've, when I'm onward to Columbia to do my master's, onward to Berkeley to do my PhD, that I'm able to have a vocabulary around these ways that I'm feeling about the things that are being taught to me. Like this isn't jiving with me, and not having to figure it out on the fly. I didn't have to figure it out on the fly because my foundation was strong. How to critique the system with the vernacular of the academy and so on and so forth was instilled in me at the very beginning. And I feel like this is, to get that in multiple classes in your curriculum, not just that one professor on campus or a couple professors on campus that know this stuff, but having 15 credits of people who have, something to say about this semester after semester. I think it's just powerful, and I think it is something that is very much worth experiencing and continues to be valuable currently.
I would say I received the same thing at Virginia State. It really brought me to a different level of consciousness about what it was to be a Black woman, and to be constantly exposed to concentrated amounts of Black excellence was transformative. My freshman year, I met Undine Smith Moore. And to have been in this Black woman's presence, who had written all these award-winning compositions, who had just simply changed our context of even dealing with the spiritual. And not long after that, I met Dr. Billy Taylor. And I had really never thought about jazz, but he really opened my ears. Meeting Nikki Giovanni at Virginia State, or Maya Angelou, or even in my senior year, Wynton Marsalis. Just the way in which there is an engagement with this larger community of thought makers and creatives, who come to these Black colleges. And then you have people who are sitting beside you that are challenging you to be better, because you realize this Black person looks like me, and this Black person is smarter than me. And so I have to bring my game up, like, so there's a certain level of competition there that, that really toughens your skin. It really makes you more focused on self-actualizing who you're going to be in this world and articulate. And you cannot hide. And the level of responsibility is profound. I can remember missing 3 classes in a row, and one of my professors showed up at my dorm room and knocked on the door and said, Miss Kernodle, I've been missing you. And I never missed a class after that. You don't get that everywhere. So there's a level of responsibility, and there's survival skills. I will be honest with you. I would have never survived the Ohio State University had I not gone to Virginia State University. And it wasn't just simply what they gave me in the classroom, but the way in which they made me understand that my Blackness was not a deficit. My womanness was not a deficit, right? But those were things to be proud of, and those were things to celebrate. And the more that I understood that, and the more that I came to a knowledge of who I was and the power of my voice, right, that it didn't matter what came against me. It didn't matter who didn't believe in what I wanted to do. It didn't even matter that I didn't have professors that looked like me, or I didn't take classes that talked about me. That they gave me the tools to search out those things, right? And I think that's powerful. That's a powerful legacy of HBCUs. And we have not written enough about that. We have not written enough about the history of HBCUs. And we still tend to only want to focus on certain HBCUs when we talk about that history. And that's unfortunate, because when we do that, we miss out on so many aspects of what that experience was, and what the legacies the legacies that were birthed at those colleges by by not only the students, but the faculty and staff that were there. I found out only after I left the greatness of people who taught me. I took theory with Clarence Whiteman, one of the most celebrated organists in America. I took voice lessons with Aldrich Atkinson. It's like these wonderful people. And so we need to do more in, really historicizing and preserving what that history is and was.
This is so amazing. You brought to mind me being a student at Howard University and having Awa Dodgen Pratt come and do a master class, and Andre Watts and Leontine Price and Sylvia Odin Lee giving us a master class. And then having people like Jeremiah Wright. I remember when he came to campus, the entire campus shut down. Everybody went to Blackburn Student Center. Nobody could hardly fit, just trying to get in there. I had a chance to work with the great Charlotte Holloman, who was in the recording Shuffle Along of 1950 with Noble Sissel and U.B. Blake. I mean, the faculty like Matawilda Dobbs, who was an African-American female to actually get a full contract at the Metropolitan Opera. I was able to sit in her studio and, hearing firsthand stories, not just from Jesse Norman, but because his name was etched in the walls. Mark Fax, the composer, Tommy Kerr, or Thomas Kerr, Easter Monday Swagger, Natalie Hunderis, all these people that were there, Hazel Scott, all these great luminaries, African-American creatives that were there. Now I saw something behind you, Dr. Kernodle, because I could recognize it, because growing up in Augusta, Georgia, my mother was very proud of her connectivity because she had a dining room with red carpet, and she also had, still is, our living room has red carpet. And I now understand why there are ducks around. I just found that out.
Okay.
But elephants had to have their nose turned up, And I saw the brick, and I have the understanding of that. And so when I see the colors red and white, a lot of people say, "What is one of my favorite colors?" One of my favorite colors happens to be red. But also across the street, my neighbors who helped raise me, the Myers, she was also a person who loved red and white, but he was a person of purple and gold. And I see some purple and gold behind you, Dr. Boykin. I saw the Greek insignia behind you, Dr. Kernodle. So we are brothers and sisters, but you all have a closer connection and affinity because you all are a part of the Divine Nine. I did go to Howard University, so I'm speaking of none other than Delta Sigma Theta sorority incorporated. My distant cousin was one of the former presidents, Dr. Louise Rice from Augusta, Georgia.
Oh, okay, yeah.
My cousin was a Delta. I was a little cheated when I went to Howard University because there was no Greek life whatsoever when I was there until I think the last semester. I think Kappa had a line and maybe AKA had a line, and there was another fraternity or sorority. When we talk about the Divine Nine, for people that don't know, I'll let you all explain it since you all are Greek. I am Phi Mu Alpha, but I'm not a part of the Divine Nine, not yet. Just waiting for the right grad chapter, so to speak. But can you all talk about the significance of your membership, Dr. Kernodle, in Delta Sigma Theta sorority, and your membership, Dr. Boykin, he's smiling now, in Omega Psi Phi fraternity, being that these organizations, fraternities and sororities, were created around the period of the Harlem Renaissance. What was their significance then and now? Personally, I was able to enter the Omega Psi Phi National Talent Hunt. And I remember when I won first prize in Los Angeles, they told me that the two previous winners from my region that won from the Southeastern region were Wynton Marsalis and Jesse Norman. So I felt an even closer connection to my mentors because when they were in high school as seniors, they were in that competition. But I also had an opportunity to work a lot with Delta Sigma Theta because my mother was on the board for their Creme de la Creme activity where they brought Alvin Ailey to Augusta, Georgia at the Imperial Theater. And that was my first time seeing Alvin Ailey. And then 2 years later, they brought Wynton Marsalis and the Wynton Marsalis Septet. So, these fraternities and sororities have always been around. They propagate community service, but they also propagate our art, our creativity, our literature. Can you all talk about the Divine Nine and your connection to Omega Psi Phi fraternity and Delta Sigma Theta sorority?
Yeah, so Omega Psi Phi, our motto is friendship is essential to the soul. And for me, being legacy, my father, my brother, my uncle, my cousin are also Qs. I grew up with uncles that I wasn't related to, with the people who my dad had pledged with and what have you, that we would get on road trips and go visit. And going to his alma mater of Hampton University growing up and seeing the brothers around the tree singing the hymn, it was just a continuously moving experience for me throughout my childhood to see these men multi-generationally enjoying each other's company and friendship. And my time in New York, in my master's, my time in Berkeley, California, and my time here at Brown have been, my fraternity has been an integral part of how I survived those experiences. At Berkeley, where I did my PhD in social psychology, I was the first Black male PhD in social psych to come out of Berkeley since 1977. There were many times where I was the only Black person I would see in a day. And so the ability to have a baked-in opportunity to join a friend group and to really just have folks that I could let my hair down and joke with and really form some good relationships. And I just talked to the Berkeley brothers over this weekend, and here in Providence, I am an officer in the local chapter here. in Providence, and it was one of the keys for me to get to the west side of Providence, where Brown University is situated on the east side. It's very much a bubble. On the west side is where many of the Black people and the people of color live, and so I got to get entrenched in, doing service in the community, working with the NAACP, working with other organizations as a member of my fraternity. It's just given me keys to build meaningful relationships and to serve my community in ways that are not necessarily just through my scholarship and my writing. And when you think also about the early days of Omega Psi Phi, as it relates to Harlem Renaissance, I mean, one, you got Elaine Locke as a professor at Howard University, and is contemporary with these individuals, and was a friend and mentor to Ernest Everett Just, who's one of the founders of our organization. But you also have Langston Hughes. He's a Q, President Beta Chapter, as a one of the people that we've talked about who was one of the integral voices in the Harlem Renaissance movement. So in that time, and it's also a time where World War I is happening, and you get some of the first officers training camps for Black folks that some members of my fraternity helped to advocate to have in the first place, and how that, returning soldiers coming back to Harlem and so on and so forth is also a part of the story in the Harlem Renaissance. My fraternity and others and the sororities were all moving and shaking during this time and contributing ideas, scholarship, and service.
Yes.
Yeah.
Dr. Kernodle?
I pledged Delta Sigma Theta in 1989, so I'm 31 years in the game, and I saw both Deltas and AKAs in my community. Those women leading, they were in my churches, the churches that I traversed as a musician. They were women who shaped my life in the classroom and shaped my life in the community. So I had a sense of that when I went to college. But at Virginia State, there's such a heavy presence of the Divine Nine. They were visible on campus as leaders, both academically and what they were doing in terms of public service. And Delta really appealed to me. The history of public service. I mean, they were the only organization, Black women's organization, to participate in the Women's March. They're at the core of our vision has been public service, through education, through the arts, mental health, the full gamut. And so I wanted to be a part of that legacy. I thought it was not enough for me to simply go to college and to better my life, but to be community minded. And so my decision to pledge one of the Divine Nine was that I wanted to continue the legacy of those women, and other women, the women of AKA, the women of Zeta Phi Beta, the women of Sigma Gamma Rho, and to stand beside my brothers, the Omega brothers, the Alpha brothers, the Kappas, all of them. And we oftentimes do not receive the attention for the good we do. People focus on they will focus on certain aspects of our culture. And so I just, before I go any further, want to give a shout out to Alpha Eta Chapter of Virginia State, where I was made, Columbus alumni, where I served as part when I was in graduate school at Ohio State, and Cincinnati Queen City alumni, which I'm a part of now. And, just being a part of a legacy of women who give scholarships to better not just the lives of women, but men as well in our community, who have directives and programs that are about advancing and progressing our agendas. We have a voting campaign going on now. That even in the midst of COVID-19, my sorors were out last weekend, signing up people to register to vote. And so we're more than steppers. We're more than steppers. We're more than colors and symbols, right? We all have very long and very complicated histories of advancing our communities. And not just in America, many of us have global chapters now. So, Delta's in Dubai, we are in Japan, we're in Toronto, we're all throughout the Caribbean. And so, it, I am proud of being a part of that history, and I hope that I have furthered that history in the way that my sisters that came before me and walked beside me.
I'm going to zoom in on you so they can see Delta Sigma Theta in the back. Yes.
Yes.
I too was very fortunate to have received scholarships and a lot of support from the Pan-Hellenic Council in Augusta, Georgia, where the Divine Nine will come together, and particularly Zetas and definitely AKAs, Alpha Kappa Alpha, and also Kappa Alpha Psi. So, our time is running by so quickly, so I'm going to curtail it a little bit so that we can just touch just a few questions. So this is my next question to you all. Both of you are change agents. You're catalysts. You use your platform, you use your work, your research to deal with protest, reconciliation, sonic resistance, embodied resistance. What are your thoughts and feelings on the climate of police brutality and racism here in America today?
Yeah, that's a toughie. I mean,
as concise as possible.
yeah. So I'm a person who has been, racially profiled. I've had police pull guns on me on multiple occasions, and so on and so forth. And also during the time you and I were at Howard, we had a brother, Prince Jones, who was a friend of mine, be murdered by a police officer. And so, to some level, I feel like what is happening now is just exists on a continuum of America that is just this has been on repeat, and we have just been able to democratize media by being able to hold people accountable, at least to the visual record, to record it, to put it on social media and get it out to the world, to let people know that these things that we have been protesting about, complaining about, making music about, and so on and so forth for these many years is actually a thing. Like, you don't have to just hear it in our songs. Now you can look at the video, and so I'm glad that this protest movement is going on. I'm inspired by the multicultural nature of it and the transnational nature of it. But it's also, something that has been endemic to what it's like being Black in this country since we got here.
Yes, very well stated, Dr. Kernodle.
I agree with him. I think he articulated that perfectly. I think we have seen on display, at least in the last several weeks, right? The embodiment of everything that we've talked about, from white women weaponizing their words, and to see the young brother in Central Park, and the woman saying, "I'm going to call the police and tell them," took me back to Emmett Till and the lie that led to Emmett Till's death, and how many more lies led to Black men being lynched and brown men being lynched, right? And I think we are in a pivotal moment now. We are in a pivotal moment. And even in the midst of a pandemic, I think we are on the precipice of change. If we do not lose momentum and lose sight, and we do not allow our short attention spans to waver us, right? I do believe that the coalition, and just as my brother said, it may be enough to propel us to a point of real social change. It has not helped that we have allowed a culture of fear that was precipitated by 9/11 to militarize our police and empower them in a way that was problematic then and is showing to be even more problematic today.
Wow, very well stated. Um, okay, if you had the opportunity to speak with yourself or speak to yourself at 18 years old, what things would you say to yourself with the knowledge you have now, Dr. Boykin and also Dr. Kernodle, in that order? If you were able to speak to yourself at 18 years old, what would you tell an 18-year-old Malik? What would you tell an 18-year-old Tammy?
I would tell my 18-year-old self to go to class more often and study and to put some time into your music, but only after you take time out to go get those A's, and that the biggest affront to a person who you feel is trying to put you down or something like that, a professor, is to get an A in their class and force them to give you that A. That A is your protest. Didn't figure that out till way later. Wish I figured it out sooner.
Mm.
Dr. Kernodle?
It's funny you asked that because I started a pandemic journal when we went to virtual classes, and it's not about the pandemic, but it's about the time of reflection that I'm having. And one of my journal entries, I did write a letter to myself, my younger self, and I just said, you know, the quirkiness that you think is a deficit makes you unique. Stop trying to change yourself to be like everyone else. Um, and everything that you dream that people don't understand, and everything that you aspire to that people tell you you cannot do, trust yourself. Just push. Take every failure as a learning lesson and not as a statement of your inability to do something or your ability to do something. Just take it as what it is. It's knowledge, it's learning. It will make you stronger, it will make you wiser, it will make you better.
Very well stated. We must embrace the idiosyncratic nature that we have, uh, our quirkiness, because we are all originals. We're not a facsimile, I say this all the time, or a copy. So we can be unique. And that's something that I think I would have told myself at an earlier age. Okay, I would like to open up real quick for a few questions, very, very quickly, if you have some. I'd like to know, what type of projects are you currently working on, or what projects are coming down the pipeline for you all that you all can share?
Yeah, I am working on a very potentially provocative behavioral genetics project that is focused on new methods for demonstrating environment effects as predictors for outcomes that people try to attribute to genetics. And so this is a series of pieces of work that I'm doing with a behavioral geneticist and a biostatistician that is going to make all of the biological determinists, the racists, very upset. And I'm also working on some new hip hop songs where I, put some of my protest in music as well. So, we got science and we got bars.
Yes.
All right.
Dr. Kernodle, and could you also mention a special virtual conference that's coming up soon as well that
Yes.
I signed up for?
Yes, yes. So, as he stated, I am the president of the Society for American Music, which is a collective of scholars and composers and performers, curators, exhibitors, educators, who are all concerned with the promotion and the preservation of the music of the Americas. So that is not just US centric, that's Canada, as well as the Caribbean, Central America, and South America. We are having our annual conference this year in a virtual format, July 16th through the 18th. And so I invite everyone to come. It is the cheapest that you will ever come to a multifaceted, excellent collective of ideas and performances and scholarship. For non-members, it's only $45. You can't get no cheaper than that. And so I'm excited about that because we are hoping to forge new pathways, and it's resistance culture. We are resisting the fact that COVID-19 canceled our in-person conference in March. And so we are standing resiliently in the spirit of our organization by forging ahead with this virtual conference. I'm also working on work that centers on Black women and civil rights, so resistance culture from that point of view, and it's multifaceted. So I'm talking about some people that we know. My work, intersects with Nina Simone, but also Adetta and Roberta Flack and Aretha Franklin, but also looking at women composers like Margaret Bonds and Undine Smith Moore, and how they created these resistance narratives in the concert hall. So I hope one day to resume my writing in the midst of my presidency, but forums like this give me an opportunity to still engage with my work. So,
This is
and
awesome.
my Mary Lou Williams book is coming out in a new edition this fall. So if I can do a cheap plug, Soul on Soul with a new preface is being published in paperback, and it'll be available in October. So I'm excited about that.
That is amazing. We've had such a extensive, brilliantly decorated and experienced cadre of viewers tonight from all over the world. If any of you that are viewing have a question for Dr. Boykin or for Dr. Kernodle, please type in your question now so that I can ask that question and I can bring it up on the screen. My last question to you all is, can you name some resources available for people that are watching that are interested in learning more about the Harlem Renaissance and Black creators in general while they are typing their questions in? Can you all speak to that, give them some resources or how they can learn more about this topic?
Um, well, I guess I'll start. So, if people are interested in Black women composers in particular, I would recommend them looking at Helen Walker Hill's book, From Spirituals to Symphonies. She highlights some of the key Black women composers and gives a fascinating historical overview in the very beginning. There's also John Michael Spencer's The New Negroes and Their Music, the success of the Harlem Renaissance. So he really tries to challenge this notion that the Renaissance was not successful. And also, just coming out next week is, I'm going to show it and is the work of Raylinda Brown,
Yes.
who unfortunately passed away, the late Raylinda Brown, who her biography on Florence Price, the Dean of African American Women Composers, is released. And Professor Guthrie Ramsey wrote the foreword for this and finished Dr. Brown's work. So those are some basics, I think.
Amazing. Thank you. Thank you. Dr. Boykin, anything you can point us to, or music or musicians or playlists?
I think for me, a really good anthology on Langston Hughes is something that I was reading last summer. And I know that there is a really good anthology of Harlem Renaissance writers by Elaine Locke that is classic and is considered, endemic to the whole movement. And so I would say, start there and and look at some of the beautiful resources that Dr. Kernodle just told us about as well.
Awesome. And before we close, I'd like to share with everyone what is coming up for the next episode. I'm super excited about it. The next episode, episode 5, will be Creatives in Television and Film from Augusta to Hollywood. We will have Shannon Baker Davis, who is a television editor, a writer, and a graduate of Howard University, originally from Augusta, Georgia, and also another Augusta native, Shay Roundtree, an actor. Many of you saw him in Drumline. Also, he's a filmmaker, and he also is a person who went to a HBCU, a historically Black college and university, Clark Atlanta University. So you definitely want to catch the next episode on Tuesday, June 23rd, 2020 at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And I'm going to bring back on Dr. Kernodle and Dr. Boykin just to tell them thank you. We do have one question and only one question, and it's from Lily Almond Harris. I'll put it on the screen. Are there many students that are seeking ways to emphasize this information throughout and beyond their courses? Anyone want to speak to that? Are you all finding students in your classes, doctoral students, that are including this information? I know Dr. Kernodle, you just worked with someone that I believe their dissertation was just approved, I believe, in the UK.
Yes, Samantha Agee, who is a concert pianist, just earned her DMA, and she's doing work on Black women composers. Also, Corey Hill, who is a graduate student at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, has done is doing some exciting work on this as well. So those are the two students, but there are a host of scholars, Doug Shadle. There are many people who are really contributing to this conversation in some very exciting ways.
Dr. Boykin?
Well, I have not had any graduate students yet, but some students that were in my class at Brown this past spring, the Psychology of Stigma and Prejudice, have been people who've taken to the streets in protest and are, trying to let their voices be heard, fighting out against police killings as well as police brutality and so on and so forth. And I'm just glad that they got a full semester of reading about 30 articles that I assigned to them, and had some great dialogues. And so I know that they're out there armed with a very good understanding of what's happening out here. And as they take to the streets and protest, they're not doing so just because it's cool.
Awesome. Can you all tell all the viewers and the people that will be watching this on demand how they can reach out to you personally, whether it be through Instagram, social media such as Facebook, Twitter, if you use Twitter more so, or even by email or your website? Can you tell everyone that's tuned in how they can contact you all? Dr. Boykin?
Yeah, my email address is c_Boykin@brown.edu. Pretty quick with the email. I'm a very light Instagram user, but I am at Starks Malik, at StarxMalik on Instagram. But you might be a little disappointed. But if you send me a message, I'll write back to you if you want to, talk to me or know more about what we're talking about.
Awesome. And Dr. Kernodle, how can people reach you?
My email address is kernodl@miamioh.edu. And I do have Twitter and Instagram. My Instagram account was cloned this week. Somebody's pretending to be me, so don't reach out to me on Instagram. But Facebook is a great way to connect with me, and I'm just Tammy Kernodle on Facebook. On Twitter, I'm the real Dr. Tammy Kernodle, and so there's another Tammy Kernodle. So hit me up.
I ain't big enough for people to be imitating me yet.
I didn't think I was either.
It is coming. Well, listen, we went
Yes,
overtime to this evening, but this has been absolutely rich, very informative, enlightening, and I am honored to be able to call you all friends and colleagues. The level of commitment that you all have for art, for literature, for all things that speak about sonic resistance and embodied resistance. That's going to be a recurring theme, I think, now, Dr. Kernodle. You've coined that phrase tonight. I mean, it really goes without words, and there aren't enough words that I can put together succinctly to give accolade and to give celebration to what you all are and what you represent. Thank you so very much for your time. Thank you for all of the knowledge that you've shared and imparted with all of us. I know that your students are really, really, really blessed and fortunate to have professors such as yourselves that are not just professors in aesthetic and principle, reading out of books, but you all are actively, as a tea bag steeped in the hot water, actually presenting and evoking and releasing the greatest amount of pure intelligence and pure response to everything that's going on in our world in the past, what we're dealing with presently, and as we can look forward to the future. Thank you so much, Dr. Boykin, and thank you so much, Dr. Kernodle. This has been absolutely amazing. Again, share this with your friends, share this with everybody that you know. Please go to their individual social media pages, follow them, get their books, their publications. I'm telling you, it will be something that you will really be glad that you had a chance to support, and great knowledge that you would have ingested. Thank you all so much, and I look forward to.
Can I just say thank you to you, Damien? Thank you for your platform and using your influence and just being who you are. And thank you, Dr. Boykin. It was a pleasure sharing this moment with you and hearing and gleaning. And I look forward to hearing your verses and seeing your scholarship. Thank you both. It was truly a pleasure tonight.
You're welcome.
The feeling is mutual. It's amazing to share the stage with two geniuses. I appreciate it.
Awesome. Well, thank you all so much.
Thank you, bro.
Thank you.